Hi everyone, this is Soda,
And this is Kale Mary.
and today we are going to talk about not just the original series, but every other series that came out until 2005. That means the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. But we're not just going to talk about the series themselves, we are going to compare all the captains that we've seen so far to the original captain, Captain Kirk, which is personally my favorite captain. Um, Mary, do you have a favorite captain?
That's a great question. So, Kirk is also my favorite captain, but I think I'm biased just because I love the original series
Yeah, I
so
mean,
much.
we both are probably.
I'm going to ask you some questions later, Soda, that Kirk might be your favorite captain, but depending on the question, he might not be the captain you choose as your answer.
I guess that's true. I guess that's true. What I find interesting that, well, I said Kirk is the original captain, but he's not the original captain. As we know, there was another captain in the pilot that never made it to the series, but we're going to keep him to the end, I think. Because the bulk of the information we have is about all the other five captains. That is Captain Picard of the Next Generation. We are not going to talk about the new Picard show because only one season is out and it's not over yet, and we don't know in what direction they're going to go. Captain Sisko of Deep Space Nine, Captain Janeway from Voyager, and Captain Archer from Enterprise. Well, do you want to do the introduction for Kirk? A brief overview.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, the original series, like Soda said, we're not going to mention Captain Pike, who was part of the pilot, and then later kind of makes an appearance in the two episodes in the original series. Star Trek: The Original Series kicks off with Captain James Tiberius Kirk manning the Starship Enterprise. I'm trying to remember. He was a tactical officer prior to becoming captain of the Enterprise. He was like maybe a tactical officer of was it the Republic, something like that. Um,
Yeah, I don't think they ever actually mentioned what position he was in before he was captain.
well, I think we can assume he was probably a lesser position on another ship. So
Yeah, well, yeah, probably in the command track too.
right, he was definitely well. He'd have to have been command tracked at some point. Or at least switched over. So it'd be interesting to talk about that with some of the other captains, I think. Kirk is clearly like in his early 30s, so he's the youngest captain in Starfleet, supposedly. Um,
Mm, at the time of the show.
yeah, and well, how to put it? He is a very he's sort of what you would call a cowboy captain. And
Yeah.
that means that um, he has a tendency to be very independent, sometimes kind of a lone wolf, if you will, in some of his decision making. But on the other hand, that's a little bit understandable because he's not only manning the flagship, but part of his mission is to travel into the unknown and kind of make first contact with some planets and just going out into uncharted space. So I would say, from my perspective, I think Kirk is he's experienced, but some of the experiences that he has when he is captain of the Enterprise is clearly not the type of experiences he had in any other ship. So uh, still, he is a bit of a maverick, and that kind of suits him well because he's
Mm-hmm.
obviously a very intelligent man. He's able to be put into a sticky situation or something, a kind of situation nobody anticipated. And he's able to use his intelligence and his, I'll say, a tendency to sort of gamble a little,
Yeah.
or take risk, if you will. And he always comes out smelling like roses. for the most part. So what that really means is Kirk has a tendency to take a very impossible situation and not only do the impossible, but somehow get his ship to safety, out of danger, to make that agreement with that really difficult to deal with race. So I think he's known for like attempting the impossible, and it just tends to work in his favor. Now, I will say part of that is probably because he's so charismatic as a leader. He's a likable man. A lot of his crew think very positively of him, very loyal to him, and even you see even like his acquaintances from his past tend to think of him fondly. They all show a great respect for him and what he does. At the same time, I think maybe one of his weaknesses is he's a little too unorthodox, maybe a little too cavalier. um, but I don't think that in any way degrades people's opinions of him. So he's got a very loyal crew, and he generally does his best to keep his crew safe and man his ship. He's a very intuitive person. I'd say if we were talking about his captain style, he's decisive, intuitive, very thinks very quickly on his feet. I would call him loyal. And again, I think a key one here is that he's very intelligent. He's sort of a tactician. When it comes to strategy, that's definitely one of his strong suits.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people ignore how intelligent he is.
Yes.
Like as you said, he's type of like a cowboy captain. I heard the words cowboy diplomacy thrown around a lot about the original crew. Yeah, he is he's very well known for his like adventures and
Mm-hmm.
action, but he is extremely intelligent, and that tends to be kind of forgotten when people talk about him.
Yeah, I would characterize him as saying he has very strong leadership skills, and I think he inspires a lot of loyalty in his crew. And
Yeah,
like I said, he's very quick to think on his feet. He can be very creative with his solutions. Um,
true.
so I see a lot of positives in him, and that for me is why I did answer your question by saying he's my favorite captain.
Yeah.
Um, on the other hand, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that no captain in all the series is perfect, right?
Or,
And so I did mention he does, have some type of weaknesses. I would say he could be a little reckless.
that's true. Yeah.
He really does not consider the possibility of failure. Now, a lot of the times that works in his favor because it means he comes up with some kind of, like I said, creative solution or strategy that gets them out of a sticky situation. But it doesn't always work out well for everybody else.
Yeah.
I think we see in several, especially in several episodes, and then in the movies, that failure is a possibility, does happen, not necessarily to him directly, but there's almost always like collateral damage when Kirk has come through.
Yeah, that's true.
Have I missed
So
anything?
I think that's a pretty good overview. As you said, because Kirk is traveling through kind of unknown space, like most, as the opening sequence says, the Enterprise is on a mission of discovery. They're going through mostly unknown space, meeting new species most of the time. They do have to get kind of creative because they're put in a lot of situations that no one has any experience with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. And he's devoted to the Enterprise.
yeah, he is.
It's almost strange they characterize his devotion to the Enterprise as sort of like a marriage. Um, it's not like the Enterprise gives him love back, but he's an ambitious man. Clearly, his career seems to have been what he's put before. relationships. We do see, a mention of past relationships in many episodes where it just doesn't work out, or he chooses his career. So, the other
Yeah.
thing I would mention here is, yes, he seems very devoted, not just to his ship, but to just to being a Starfleet captain.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next captain, which is Captain Picard of the Next Generation. There is about 100 years separating the era of Kirk and Picard, and the reality in the Star Trek universe has changed a lot. Not like super drastically, but it has changed a lot. As I said, because Kirk was basically traveling through unknown space. Picard is kind of the opposite of that. Is he's the opposite of Kirk in many areas. Picard is traveling mostly through very well-known space. Most of the species he and his crew deal with are species they already know. They do make some first contact in a few episodes and meet, find themselves in new and unexpected circumstances. But for the most part, a lot of the people they deal with are people they already know. Picard himself is older than Kirk. He isn't the youngest captain ever. He's pretty old and mature. Um, he's kind of like I'd say he's more paternalistic than Kirk in a way. He's like this old wise father figure in the crew. He is also not as social or charming as Kirk is. He has his charms, I'm sure, but he's far more. He's not a cowboy. You can't categorize him as a cowboy. He's a diplomat. He's a very, formal person. He's basically more of an ambassador, really. He is a captain. He has led his crew through some, dangerous situations and so forth. But he is very well known for his diplomatic skills, basically. And yeah, well, he's the first few seasons especially. He's not a very pleasant person either. He hates kids, which is the thing. The first season was very, very, very anxious to tell us because every time there was a kid around, he just acted like he just acted so nasty. Honestly, it was so unpleasant. Um, but yeah, he is mostly remembered, I think, as the wise older captain that's less impulsive than Kirk. And to a certain extent, he is. I think what's interesting here is that when we see both of their histories, of what little glimpses we get of them, it seems almost like Kirk and Picard went through like completely different trajectories. Like Kirk used to be like this nerdy bookworm who learned to be more social and have more fun, while Picard is kind of the opposite. He used to be this reckless teenager who grew up and became more settled and mature. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say on Picard. Do you have something to add?
I mean, I'll say here, because he is older, you tend to think he's a little wiser in some of the decisions that he makes.
Yeah.
He seems eloquent, very intelligent. Like you said, he's extremely suited to diplomacy, and he's very good at including like his command staff in decisions. Um, Even if, to your point, he does not necessarily treat his crew like family, especially in the beginning. It's more like a militaristic type. Like,
I wouldn't go there, but it's
yeah.
more like, office buddies. It's like, yeah, we know each other, but yeah,
It's
we're not
more
exactly.
formal. The
Yeah.
the interactions with his crew in the beginning are particularly more formal, which you definitely don't see that with Kirk. Like even from the first episode with Kirk, he's like touching
Yeah.
people, and being familiar with some of his crew, friendly
It, it's
even.
interesting. It's interesting that in both cases, it's made clear early on that the captain and the medical, the CMO, the commanding medical officers, are have a pre-existing relationship. They know each other. They're
Yeah.
friends. But with Kirk and McCoy, it's more like we are very old friends. We trust each other. Meanwhile, with Picard and Crusher, Dr. Crusher, it's like, it's more formal and a lot more awkward because Picard used to be the commanding officer of her dead husband, so it's
Yes.
kind of really weird. So that's also interesting.
And as you said, like people's initial perception of him is that he's sort of arrogant. I think even his
Yeah,
own family has thought of him as arrogant. Um, he's he does. He seems like somewhat of a leader, but who is sort of distant and maybe aloof. From others. I think even some people might have called him stodgy.
yeah, I can see that.
But at the same time, like you said, he's very good at what he does when it's a known situation.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily think his strength is in coming up with like a very creative
yeah.
strategy in the heat of battle.
He's very much a stickler for the rules. He follows them very closely. Um, every point of breaking the rules, even for a good purpose, is like he has to ruminate on it very, very long. He's very hesitant. Kirk is like, if the better outcome is like comes from breaking the rules, then we'll break them. So
Right. And
I
it's
think
like
that
we're in crisis mode.
yeah, I think that's why the Kirk has like this image of recklessness, while
Yeah.
Picard doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to point out that the ships themselves between the eras are very, very different because the Enterprise in the original series is very much like a military vessel. It's kind of, yeah, it's colorful, but it's also kind of Spartan. It has the feel of a submarine almost. Like everything is metallic. It's kind of small.
Yeah.
It looks kind of like a military vessel, and we know that it only is commissioned for a mission. It's on a 5-year mission. The Enterprise D in the Next Generation is not on a mission. It's basically where people live and work, and it's built like almost a hotel. Everything is covered in like these rugs, and the chairs are like these big comfortable things, and like the living quarters are huge compared to the original series ones. There is a bar on the ship, so yeah,
Yeah.
so it's interesting.
It's very interesting.
It's an interesting contrast. It's like the working conditions are far more comfortable than they were on the ship, and the environment is more relaxed. Like you can see that Starfleet has become more confident, basically.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Next on, we are moving to Cisco. There is always this argument of like who is your favorite captain, and Picard and Kirk are always the ones on top that people choose. But I have seen a growing movement of like Sisko is the best captain in recent years, especially as more and more people are watching Deep Space Nine.
Hmm. I I was gonna say I'm a fan of Cisco. He's actually like my number two.
Yeah, Sisko is a very good captain. It's actually interesting that Sisko wasn't a captain until season 3. He was just a commander. Yeah.
Yeah.
Up up until Cisco, unlike Kirk and Picard, he is working in familiar. He's kind of straddling both points. He's working in mostly familiar space in the species he knows, but he also has access to an area full of species he doesn't know and comes in contact with often. Unlike Kirk and Picard, he does have a ship, but his main command is of a station. He doesn't really go many places. There are some episodes they do have a ship. He's commanding, of course, the station Deep Space Nine, and they do get a ship, the Defiant, but
Yeah.
it's a small ship. It's mostly a war vessel because a big part of the Deep Space Nine plot involves the war.
Right.
But for the most part, he stays put on his space station where he commands. Also, unlike any of the other captains, Sisko is a family man. He has a family. He has a son, and in later season he gets married too. I think Sisko is kind of like, I think, a merge of Kirk and Picard in sort of ways, because he's a good diplomat. He's not a bad diplomat. He's not. I don't think you can say he's reckless, but he does have like this spark of like
He's impulsive.
unexpected. Yeah, he's impulsive. It can be very unexpected sometimes. Um, and he does bend the rules. He's not a stickler for the rules like Picard in any way. But he does have very good diplomatic skills, because basically the bulk of his role when he was first given the command of the space station is to bridge the gap between the Federation and the planet that wants to join the Federation, basically. And he has to deal with this planet, Bajor, which is coming out of a very long occupation, and Bajor itself is like kind of unsettled and still recovering. And there are a lot of factions, and there are religious leaders, and there are rebel leaders, and he has to deal with all of them. It's a pretty good testament to his diplomatic skills that he managed to survive there for so long, and garner the support of the people there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like Kirk, his crew is kind of become this family. I'd say he's very he like he does he actually, I think he does it more than Kirk, even, because like we see him invite the crew over for like dinners at his home, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think he's the captain that gets the closest to his crew, actually.
He's very interesting. Like Kirk, I mean, in like Picard, he's a very good leader,
Yeah,
but I think that's definitely his strength is just how stalwart he is.
yeah,
Um, I mean, he even describes himself at one point as, once he makes a decision, that's it.
yeah,
um, so he's very, like, he's really no nonsense in a way
yeah.
because he's so confident. He's such a confident, like, strong leader. And he does have combat experience. I think his track was actually engineering.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I think he was on the engineering track before he was made like first officer of one of the vessels that he was on, and then so his background's just a little different, but at the same time, like I just can't really think of any any other words except for him, but strong and decisive.
He is strong and decisive.
But on the other hand, like we said, he can be a little bit impulsive. He can do something you don't necessarily wouldn't have necessarily expected from him. Um, when he's like pushed, he's really, like you said, he's very moral, but at the same time
Yeah.
he's willing to bend the rules. So when he's pushed into a place where he feels like very strongly or passionate about something, for instance, once they're in the war, he can be very impulsive in the kinds of decisions he makes, thinking that he's making the right decisions.
Yeah.
And so that does kind of like make his behavior a little high risk sometimes.
He's also a pretty good tactician, like Kirk. Especially because you get to see him in a state of war, basically. So we get to know that very well.
Yeah.
Also, I think, if I had to categorize, I'd say Kirk and Picard are kind of idealists, but Sisko is kind of a realist.
He's a pragmatist.
Yeah,
Pragmatist. Yeah.
exactly. Pragmatic. He's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
Like he gets put in this new world with all kind of people who aren't exactly friendly to the Federation, who are living in very different conditions from the Federation. And he's like, okay, I'll play by your rules. Like I have my rules. I have the Federation and its ideals, but I can see this is not going to work here because you don't have the conditions that we have. So I'm gonna have to play by your rules, even if I don't like them very much. Um, so yeah,
I will say I think he's pretty adaptable. I mean, and it's
yeah,
probably necessarily just given his position because, I mean, he's essentially in charge of a station on the edge of, like you said, the edge of like
no space.
the space next to a
Yeah,
wormhole that leads to some enemy territory.
Yeah, basically.
And there's a lot of, so he deals a lot more frequently with like everybody from, like all different races from the quadrant, right? So
Yeah,
uh, he's got to be very adaptable, like dealing with all those personalities. Whereas like Kirk is captaining a crew of mostly humans.
hmm,
And they meet with other species, but it's like a brief like encounter, right? And then they
yeah,
get back on their ship, and they're all humans except Spock.
yeah,
Then with Picard, he's got a lot more. Say his crew is a lot more representative of the different races of the Federation.
yeah,
But at the same time, they're all like they kind of get along. they're they're more used to just, I guess, operating together. Whereas sometimes I feel like the space station is just a bunch of riffraff coming through.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Very
definitely
challenging.
true. That's very definitely true. Picard has a lot more control of his environment than
Yeah,
Sisko
yeah.
does.
And so for that reason, he has to be able to adapt pretty quick to some very like tense situations.
Yeah, also you bring up a really good point that Sisko has to like con- be in contact for a long term with the people he's around, with the Bajorans, Deep Space
Mm-hmm.
Nine. He's near the planet of Bajor. Meanwhile, Kirk and Picard like meet the species and then fly off to do something else. They
Yes.
don't have to sit around and see the results of their actions, basically.
Like, oh, well, I'm glad we have had a good first contact. Okay, now I'm going to turn you over to our
Yeah,
diplomatic specialist. Like, we're off to
yeah,
do something else.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, and so for him, he really has to be a captain who's very good at, like you said, not just like being diplomatic, but just building strong relationships, and he has to be good at handling conflict.
Yeah, and unlike I think any other captain we are going to discuss, Cisco has a family, so he's not actually married to his job. In fact,
Yeah.
both in the first season and the last season, he's talking about retiring. He doesn't want to be in Starfleet anymore. He wants to dedicate himself to his family,
Yep.
which is also kind of unique.
Very true.
Moving on. Okay, Janeway. Janeway from Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, he is a little hard to talk about because the writing for Voyager was so inconsistent. There was Voyager is famous for its inconsistency because there was a lot of fighting going on in the writers' room. There are groups of writers who wanted to take the show in one direction, and another group wanted to take them in another direction, and as a result, Janeway tends to act kind of differently in some episodes than she does in another episodes, and it's kind of a shame because Voyager had a lot of like potential, but a lot of time it got like squandered because the writers just couldn't decide on what to do with it.
And unfortunately, that sort of plays into some of the weaknesses of the character, because then
Exactly.
you see her and you think, well, maybe she's just inconsistent. But like you said, it can really be tied back to the issues with the writing of the show.
Yeah. In general terms, I think Janeway is actually the closest captain to Kirk that we see because while Janeway lives in the era of the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, where most of the Alpha Quadrant is well known, and there are so many species that are well known, there isn't a lot of exploration going on. The central story of Voyager is that the ship Voyager, captained by Janeway, gets thrown like hundreds of thousands of light years away into the Delta Quadrant,
Yes.
where it will take them 70 years to get back home unless they find a different solution, of course. So they have to kind of like explore this new space with absolutely no help from the Federation. They have to survive and get back home. And we see Janeway making first contact with a lot of new species, charting territory that literally no one from the Federation has ever been to. And yeah, they have. She is kind of very close to Kirk in that regard, in that exploration angle and the action angle, because, like I said, the Voyager is completely alone in definite new territory, and a lot of the species can be hostile, and a lot of situations can be dangerous. So she has to like constantly think on her feet, and she does tend to break a lot of Federation rules because they find themselves a lot in an unfamiliar situation where Federation rules could get them, killed, basically.
But also, like, that far out being lost, like, who's holding them accountable on a
Exactly,
real
that
time
too.
basis? It's more like, oh, well, if we get back, before we're old aged,
Yeah.
and I give you all my logs of what I did, what are you going to do to me? It's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, in her defense, I do feel like she's trying very hard to
Yes.
uphold Federation standards, and she tries to get her crew to do it too, even though they don't always agree with her.
She's very
Which is nice.
protective of her crew,
She is.
like
She
Kirk
really is.
is.
Yeah, and I think they do end up being kind of like a family, just out of necessity because they are stuck basically light years away from any other human or Vulcan out there.
If I had to give her, like,
Hmm.
one good, like, quality that stands out to me, it's perseverance. Because
Yeah.
without that, they could not tolerate their situation. And always keep the hope that they'll be able to make it back home, essentially.
Yeah,
So,
basically.
to have to be a leader of a ship that is essentially lost with no real assurance that they'll ever see their families again, get back to somewhere that's home to them. It takes a lot of, like, strength of character to stay in charge in that situation, because frankly, people could go crazy.
That's true. That's really true. In fact, we actually see in an episode of Voyager what happens to another ship that did go crazy, basically.
Yeah.
It was in a similar situation. So yeah, that's mostly what I have to say about Janeway. It really is a shame we can. I don't have a lot of concrete things to say about her again because she was written so inconsistently. You can see it because some people focus on her better episodes and they love her, and others
Yes.
focus on her worst episodes and they think she's the worst captain ever. And they don't always match because some episodes she does one thing and another episode she does another thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to talk about her because of that.
Yeah, it like you said, other than the fact that she's has to sort of be like Kirk and think on her feet and get him out of sticky situations, it's really hard to, like, pinpoint what she's really good at.
Yeah.
Like, from a strategy perspective, because some of the what she does is so inconsistent, and some of it's very poor decision making. Um,
Yeah.
the only other thing I'll mention here is that, and this is something that stood out to me right away when I started watching Voyager the first time. She's definitely scientific. You can tell she comes from a
Yeah.
science background.
I think that's the one that was actually confirmed in the show. She is, I think, from engineering or science or something like that.
I'm fairly sure she's from science, and because
Yeah,
I remember her
probably.
just, like, she's not asking her crewmen to, like, go up there and do the science
Yeah.
scopes or whatever. She's just doing it herself. Like, I was like, wow, good for you.
Till they get 7 of 9, I think, and then she's in charge of the science.
Yeah, and she sounded like she was knowledgeable while she was
Yeah.
doing it. So I was impressed. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, a captain from a science background.
Yeah. So that's nice. I also think I think Voyager had generally more action episodes than diplomacy episodes. She's very good at action situation, I think.
Yeah.
She's like I said, she thinks on her feet. She does come up with creative solutions for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think because of the inconsistent writing, like, she had some real moments that made you not like her character. I always found it funny, her quirk about having to have enough coffee. I think
yeah,
that's a relatable quirk. But at the same time, like, if she didn't have her coffee, you're, like, appalled at her behavior.
yeah, kind of.
Kind of.
Yeah,
So,
and
anyway.
she can get really like she can get, like you said, because she's very defensive of her crew, she can get very, very nasty to people who threaten them and
Oh yeah.
harm them. Yeah, you don't want to make her mad.
But at the same time, she's like, don't you dare compare me to somebody else. Like when Q goes, like Picard would never hit me. She's like, I'm not Picard.
No, that was Sisko. Sisko punched Q in the face. I'm not Picard.
So yeah, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we have to say about Janeway. Like I said, some people kind of ignore her. I mean, I think it's kind of, it's personal because every Star Trek show has bad episodes, right?
Yes.
And I think it's legitimate if some people want to say, like, yeah, we ignore the bad episodes because it's just bad writing. We choose to only look at the good episodes. And if you go by them, then Janeway is a great captain, and she's my favorite. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine by me. I mean, it's legit. I think it's a legit point to make because I personally also ignore a lot of episodes in the shows I love because they're stupid. Yeah. Okay, so the last captain, which is also the first captain, strangely, Archer, Captain Archer from Star Trek Enterprise. If if Roger's writing was inconsistent, I think it's okay to say that Enterprise writing was overall bad.
You almost made me choke there, but I don't disagree.
For the most part, it was just bad. Like, I think they actually managed to get a little bit better at the last season, the fourth season.
Yeah.
But overall, it was pretty bad. It feels like it had the least amount of substance. Overall, I can't recall an episode of Enterprise that really made me think or excited my imagination or something like that all the other shows had. Like, I never saw a concept of an Enterprise that I was like, that's so cool, that's so interesting. Like, I think the closest one was maybe the Zindi, like the 6 different species that developed on one planet, a sentient species.
Yes.
But they didn't really, yeah, but even that didn't really, because they took this concept and basically made it into an enemy basically. So it was kind of like, I felt like it had wasted potential.
I mean, and the thing is, the premise of the show is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It actually is because I mean, I would have loved to see a good show about the origins of the Federation.
Yes, and it's like you said, pre-Federation. You have a motley crew of people on a ship who are not necessarily trained that well. I mean,
Yeah.
Archer was what, a test pilot before he became a captain?
Yep.
And you don't have a prime directive. There's just,
you don't have stuff.
You really just you're missing so much of the structure that is inherently part of the original series, the framework of, what are the confines in which Kirk is supposed to be operating, how he deals with other races. And then, it's fun to see him go out of those bounds, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, and then justify that. But technically, it's like you have no rules. It opens up with Enterprise. They're just out in the middle of nowhere, basically lamenting the fact that they haven't come into first contact with anybody, like shooting some rocks in space to pass the time. It's the concept of the cowboy captain is Archer, because he literally has no rules to abide by. Exactly. He makes them up as he goes, but at the same time, it's the bad writing is what takes all the potential out of the show.
Yeah, it's annoying because it had some interesting concept, like the animosity between what we know as the original founding species of the Federation. Like, we get to see that the humans and Vulcans didn't really get along at first, and neither did the Andorians and the Vulcans, and the Andorians and the Tellarites, and the Tellarites and the Vulcans, and it's interesting to see those relationships, but again, the writing was pretty poor, so we didn't really get that much of a good look at it. It just kind of felt very cliche at times, even, I would say.
And you see like how weak the bonds are with like the other races between the Terrans and
Yeah,
the Vulcans, and so the fact that he has a Vulcan officer on his ship, it's not part of Starfleet, not doesn't have any real connection to him and his crew other than place there. if
yeah,
if you will, like the fact that they have those inherent issues going into their mission means that it really affects a lot of his decision making. Like he gets hung up, and so does the rest of his crew at times. Like you're
yeah,
out there to meet more species to do first contacts, and yet it's almost like you have a hard time being cooperative with them.
yeah, that's true. And like, also from the get go, they just got entangled in these very weird and convoluted storylines. Like the first episode was about like the temporal Cold War, and it takes them so long to explain what it is. And I think like if I was like a new viewer who've never watched anything Star Trek, and I would come in watching the first episode of Enterprise, I don't think I would want to see any more of it because it was convoluted and needlessly like edgy, trying to be edgy with the alien. I think it was like an alien strip show at the middle of the episode or something like that, and it was too dark, too edgy, too complicated, and like not interesting at all. And afterwards, they do kind of drop the storyline for like a whole season.
Yeah.
And but the episodes themselves don't get any better because you get the feeling that humans are kind of like little kids, and the Vulcans are making very reasonable demands, but the story wants you to be on the human side.
Yes.
So like I don't know, they go to a planet and T'Pol, the first officer, who is a Vulcan, who no one basically wants her there in the first few episodes. She's like, let's wait, let's like survey this planet, let's gather information, and then you can go on it. And Archer, I swear to God, Archer says, "But we're bored."
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like that's not a reason to put your crew in danger. Being bored, it just feels like a bunch of scrappy. In Deep Space Nine, I didn't mention it, but in Deep Space Nine, unlike Enterprise and like excuse me, unlike the original series and the Next Generation, where we basically saw the flagship of the crew, with the best officers of all of Starfleet. In Deep Space Nine, we have like this scrappy crew of people who kind of come from all walks of life and aren't necessarily the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of arrived at this place. Now, Enterprise feels like also like this scrappy crew, but it feels like a scrappy crew who wasn't even meant to be here. Like, at least in Deep Space Nine, everyone kind of knew their jobs. They just
Right.
weren't, the top of the fleet. But in Enterprise, it's like, why are you here?
Well, it's like when they were sent out, they didn't know what they were really getting into, and some of them
Yeah,
kind of had a moment where they, especially when they encounter like their first danger, like
yeah,
dangerous scenario, where they're going, I don't think I'm in the right place. I
yeah,
regret this.
exactly,
Can we turn the ship around? Like, no, you. This is what you signed up for.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah, they have a lot to work through.
They do.
Like you said, you don't come into it feeling like they're a crew, a cohesive
Yeah,
crew. Not like with the original series or with the Next Generation, even Voyager. Like you just don't get the sense that they even know
trained.
each other,
Yeah.
really.
I mean, it's okay if they don't know each other, but you get the sense they just weren't prepared for anything, and it kind of loses the feeling of Star Trek because Star Trek was always about like people who are trained, who rely on each other, not necessarily because they're good friends, though usually they become good
Yeah.
friends, but because they know that they are well trained. and they know they have the capabilities of withstanding those scenarios, which is why they rely on each other. You don't get this sense in Enterprise.
And again, that's why I go back to the point of like they're not coming from the type of like academy, the training situations, the you know, the education or the polish that a lot of Starfleet officers have, especially when they're put onto a ship and sent out into deep space or into uncharted territory. Um, you know, they're missing a, like I said, a lot of that structure that makes them a well trained. So even if they are like new to each other, at least they know how to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And they have something in common, and like they all have the same kind of education and background and training to be there. So, and you don't even get that sense when it starts.
Yeah. Okay. So that's enough about Enterprise, but Archer himself.
Yes, Archer himself.
Archer himself. Um, well, because the writing is poor, Arthur does not come out looking like a very good captain, I think. He's, I mean, as I said, I felt like Janeway is closer to Kirk, even though Archer was probably supposed to be the closest one to Kirk,
Right.
right? Because he's the closest, is like before his era, he's in the closest conditions, but Archer doesn't feel close to Kirk because Kirk was more intellectual and more of a tactician. Archer is neither of those things. He's kind of making it up as he goes, but he makes so many mistakes, like so many, honestly. It's like he doesn't think things through.
The term that came to mind was loose cannon.
Yeah, exactly. He's a very loose cannon. I don't know if you. I mean, he is kind of committed to the. Well, Starfleet does kind of exist, but only as the space division of Earth,
Yes.
basically. So there is a Starfleet, but it's not the Starfleet we know. And he is a Starfleet officer, but it's not really the Starfleet we know. He is committed to the Starfleet that there is. Um, but so I can't really call him that much of a loose cannon, but he doesn't seem to think things through ever, basically. I think he is the captain that comes the closest to really crossing the line of not just breaking the rules, but breaking, moral codes.
Yes.
He does kind of feel bad about it later on, but also the writing, because of the bad writing, basically every species they meet is hostile, which is it gets really tiring after a while, personally. And he is, you can see why he's driven to the breaking point, but then again, it's also kind of the blame of the writing, because why is space so weirdly hostile? We've never seen it be like this in any other show. The great thing about Star Trek was always the diversity. Some species were friendly, some were not. In Star Trek Enterprise, almost every species wants to kill you. um,
Yeah, he's not much of a diplomat, but at the same time,
yeah,
like I guess I would say he gets better at handling hostile races.
he does, kind of, but only because he becomes more violent. I feel like, um, yeah, yeah. So I don't like Archer very much.
I'm with you. It was very hard for me to have any respect for him, especially in the first two seasons. I, I was like, why do you keep making such terrible decisions? Like, why can't you just listen to the voice of logic sometimes? Like, why
Yeah,
do you just have to be
exactly.
so disdainful of that just because it's a Vulcan?
Yeah.
Like, so he's not very good at taking advice from people who are more experienced.
That's the thing. He doesn't listen to logic or morality. He's like,
Yeah.
he's in neither category.
At the end of the day, I would say, okay, I guess he gets the job done, but he doesn't get it done well.
Yeah.
He doesn't get it done with the finesse that Picard would do it, or with the cleverness that Kirk would. And yeah, that's all I got to say.
He's just, yeah. I mean, Janeway at least had her good points. I'm struggling to think of like good Archer moments. Yeah, he's just yeah. Maybe if Enterprise got the 3 more seasons that the other shows got, maybe Archer would have had more good points because the writing did get better in season 4, but sadly that's when the show was cancelled.
Yeah. I mean, I will give him. I guess I give him props for he does take responsibility. That's what a good leader should do.
Yeah,
But
that's
at the
true.
same time, like you should take responsibility because a lot of it's because of your poor decision making.
Yeah.
So
Also, Archer has a thing too, like Janeway has with coffee. Archer has with water polo. I don't know what was here. Like, who in the writers just was like, yeah, water polo. Why not? That makes sense.
totally. We should mention Archer's one family member,
Oh,
the
one
dog.
family member. Oh yeah, yeah.
Porthos.
Archer is the only captain to have a pet.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
That he occasionally takes down to the hostile planet.
That's also true, and that results in very bad things.
Yes.
Amazing.
Again, you just go, why? It's
Exactly.
not like Sisko's like, let me take my son over through the wormhole.
Yeah, I mean, he did his fun time, and
Well,
it
yes,
didn't
but
go very well, but he
circumstances.
learned. Yeah.
So, all right, so that would be sort of our synopsis of the 5 different captains.
Well, I guess we should talk a little bit about Captain Pike right
Yeah.
now. Okay, so Captain Pike was, well, he originally appeared in the pilot of the original series. He was supposed to be the captain of the show, but there was a problem with the actor. It didn't fit his schedule to film the show, so they rewrote the character, and it became Kirk, played by William Shatner. But Pike later appeared, played by a different actor, but in the two-parter The Menagerie in the original series. And recently, he's also appeared in season 2 of Discovery, and it's been announced that he's going to have his own show, Strange New World, right?
Yes, Strange New World.
Yeah. So yeah, the thing is, the Pike we see in the pilot and the Pike we see in Discovery are kind of different people. I feel. The Pike we see in the pilot is kind of broody.
Yes.
Is kind of broody and moody. He seems kind of depressed basically throughout the entire
Well, he kind of
episode.
is depressed at that point. He's just
Yeah,
like kind of decided he doesn't want to be a captain anymore.
yeah, basically. Yeah. Um, we don't get to see him too much. We don't get to see, we don't get to see what kind of decisions he makes, what kind of how easy he is under like pressure and action and that much. But he's shown to be kind of clever, right? He's not a stupid person. Um, he he's kind of a sexist, but it was also 1966, which I guess is kind of a reflection of the time. Um,
Can I mention the Pike from the Abramsverse?
all right, yeah,
Like you said, we didn't have a whole lot to go on from the Pike in the original series. Like you said, you get the impression he's broody. I did get the impression he's very like no nonsense, but it
mm,
could have just been the point at which we see him where, like you said, he's kind of fed up with his position. Um, so there's not a whole lot of material there to go on to extrapolate the
yeah,
character. However, in Abrams' verse, we get to see Pike's character revitalized, and he's very prominent in the first movie, and then prominent halfway through the second movie. And a lot of people enjoyed his character, and I'll tell you why. It's
yeah,
because those characteristics that like the no nonsense that you kind of saw of Pike in the original series was also part of the character in the Abramsverse. He was very by the book, a decorated starship captain, very experienced. He was older, so he seemed wiser. And you could see he was about like respect. He commanded respect, and he was about like following the rules. But he had this little something that meant that he, in his younger years, maybe he was a little more impulsive. And so when you had Kirk, who was very impulsive, new, like, new cadet in the academy, Pike was sort of the restraining influence on him and the mentor to him. But at the same time, you could see, like, while Pike is like, you need to follow the rules, you need to consider all the ramifications of the choices that you make. You can't just go off and do something reckless that could get a bunch of people killed or cause problems later on. Like, you need to think these things through. You could see he like understood why Kirk wanted to do something that was out of the box. So he didn't necessarily like say never do anything out of the box. He's like, try to operate within the rules when you can, and when you're placed in a situation where you need to like reassess that's when you have your moments. And then the actor Bruce Greenwood, who played Captain Pike, like he carried that off very well. So he really did give you the impression of like an older, wiser, sort of like an older, wiser Kirk. Again, one who was a little more formal, played by the rules where he could. So how does that play into Discovery Pike?
Discovery Pike comes into season 2 of Discovery and basically is the captain, the temporary captain of the ship for the entire season. He is in Discovery a ridiculously perfect captain, I would say, like ridiculously upright and moral and like a leader who inspires love. I mean, I wanted to mention that in the menagerie, what we see as Pike in the menagerie is basically disfigured, is disabled, is can only communicate through like this weird chair that flips of light.
Yes.
And but he still seems to inspire a lot of loyalty in Spock. And if you go by his Discovery characterization, you can kind of see why, because he is ridiculously perfect as a captain. Like, he's basically what you would want. Like the model Starfleet captain. That's who he is. Yeah, he is. I mean, I guess he's kind of like that because the first captain of Discovery, Lorca, turned out to be basically evil.
Right.
So they kind of maybe they wanted to have like a 180 spin and go like without the perfect captain. You had the worst captain, now you get the perfect captain. But yeah, he doesn't. But there is kind of a disconnect between pilot's original series Pike and the show Discovery season 2 Pike, because like he doesn't seem broody at all. He seems very happy in his position. He almost always knows what to do, basically. Yeah, he's just very good at inspiring people and getting them to do their job, and he always understands and he supports everybody, and he's just a ridiculously perfect captain.
He commands a lot of respect and loyalty.
Yeah.
And, that's the reason why I wanted to bring up the Abramsverse Pike, because I thought there would be more similarities between Discovery Pike and Abramsverse. Yeah. And it sounds like there is.
There might be, yeah.
I mean, but again, Abramsverse Pike was not in any way perfect, but he was definitely seasoned and commanded a lot of respect and loyalty, and you could see why someone like Kirk would look up to him as a mentor, as a role model, and basically respect Pike, even if Pike dressed him down for doing something stupid. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Pike in the new show, because you can't have a perfect captain for many seasons and have people stay interested.
Yeah,
He
I
he
wondered
needs
this
to be a
too.
little more imperfect, a little more
He's
flawed, a little more human.
he is even ridiculously committed to his job. Like spoilers, of course. Yeah, for, maybe it's a little late to say this. Spoilers for anyone who didn't watch Discovery season 2. At some point, Pike sees his future. Basically, he gets to see his future. He needs to do this one thing that will help save the universe. And he gets told that if he still does it after his future is set. You can't change it. And he sees, of course, his future as disabled, as disfigured by this accident, and committed to a wheelchair, and he can speak basically and barely move. And he sees it and he's horrified, but he still does the thing he needs to do, because he is ridiculously perfect. Nothing phases him. He is willing to sacrifice himself for that thing. So
Wow.
yeah, I do get this sense that he doesn't really seem like the guy at the original series pilot. Like he doesn't seem, I mean, I understand why he's not as sexist as he was in the original series pilot. But he doesn't seem like any to have any sort of like any hints that he is depressed or dissatisfied with his life as a captain or anything like that.
Well, how does he compare then to Kirk of the original series? Are they similar or very different?
I'd say they're kind of similar in the sense that the original series Kirk was also mostly kind of presented as like the perfect captain, right? Like he's very inspiring and the leader and stuff. But I think Pike was taken like to the extreme in the terms of how perfect he is as a captain. Um, he's just like ridiculously good at his job. I can't think of really a flaw that he has.
Well, it sounds like after Lorca, that's what the crew needed.
It might have been.
Maybe they all would have quit if they hadn't gotten somebody who was someone to inspire them to basically restore their faith in people.
Maybe they need to have their favorite stuff in Starfleet, so they like, let's send them the best guy we have.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I feel like
Okay.
at some point, once the show has at least had their first season, we will have something very interesting to talk about.
Yeah. Especially since they already cast a Kirk and a McCoy. I mean, they're looking for a McCoy, so that will be interesting to see.
Let me ask you a question.
All right.
Okay. If you had to be part of a crew under any one of the captains we've talked about, which captain would you choose to serve under and why?
That's kind of hard because are we talking just the captain or also the ship plus slash
No, we're
station?
talking. Let's just talk about serving under a particular captain. So if you could serve under Kirk or Picard or Sisko, Janeway, Archer, which one would you choose and why? Or which one would you not choose and why?
Well, I would definitely not want to be under Archer. I can tell you that. I think it would have actually been interesting to serve under Janeway. Not in the sense that I want to be stuck in a different side of the galaxy, but I think she is a pretty chill captain when she's not, constantly put in dangerous situations. Voyager is originally a scientific ship. It's not really a military or exploration vessel. So, and I think her command style will be actually pretty good under those circumstances. Um, Otherwise, Cisco is also pretty nice. Like I said, he's the one that takes the most care of, getting to know his crew. Like he invites them over for dinners. Like I said, he's really like treating them like part of his family. Basically, he's interested in their lives.
Yeah.
He, I guess, working under Picard also wouldn't be terrible. If only because also he's more diplomatic, so he isn't really put that much in dangerous situations.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think either Cisco or Janeway would be the best. I don't say Kirk, even though he's my favorite captain, because well, he does tend to put his crew in a lot of dangerous situations.
Yes.
If I was more of an action-seeking person, maybe then I would say Kirk, but I'm not. Which one would you choose?
My answer is Cisco. Because I think for me, it's very important to have a good relationship with your boss. And to your point, he treats his staff like family. My only caveat there is I don't really want a boss who could throw me into a war. but
I mean, it wasn't really, he didn't
but
decide to go to war.
all those circumstances aside, with the really tense relationships and the potential war, uh, you know,
Yeah.
all that aside, I would probably do well under Cisco, just because, like I said, I think it's important to to feel connected to the leader that you serve. It's very easy to respect. He's very competent. I respect somebody who can be very decisive and not flip like change their mind like 5 seconds later. So for me, that I think for me he presents a real stability, and
Mhm.
for me I would be Cisco. But like
Yeah.
you, Kirk is my favorite captain, but I would not want to be on his ship, and I especially wouldn't want to be a red shirt. That would be
Yeah.
end game. Um, Kirk does have a tendency, like, if you're part of his circle, he's gonna go come hell or high water. He's going to be loyal to you, protect you, try to keep you safe. But but at the same time, you're always gonna be. He's always gonna be putting you in very
Dangerous.
precarious situations.
Yeah. Exactly.
um, I would never consider Archer simply because I don't think like I,
Archer is
I
just
would
a
be a
guest.
nervous wreck. I would I don't
Yeah.
I don't know if we're gonna make it another day. Like this man is I'm not sure this man can keep us alive.
Yeah. Exactly.
um I like I don't think it would be bad under Janeway. I never really had a feel for because of the writing, I really never had a feel of what her strong suits were, besides like being somebody you could who's very determined, that you could count on to try to get you home. Like, I respect that, but at the same time, what would she be like in normal circumstances? I don't know. So I just kind of left her out of the
Yeah.
the options there. So Picard, I would admire Picard, and I would probably feel like, well, he's gonna do his best,
Yeah.
and I would probably feel safe, but at the same time, I don't think I'd feel very connected to him. So for me to serve on that ship, it would be like an honor, but at the same time, I don't think it would be something that I would want to do for a long time. So,
Yeah.
like I said, family to me is like pretty important. Even with when you have a working relationship with someone, it's, you want to know you're a good team. So, Cisco,
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think because as you said, Janeway is so determined to get home. I feel like she's someone who would go to bat for you. Like she she may not be as approachable as Cisco, but she is her crew is very important to her, and I get the feeling that she cares not just about the inner circle. Like Kirk cares about his crew, but he mostly cares about the command staff.
Exactly, yes.
Like you said, if you're a red shirt, you're a gunner. Um, but I get the feeling Janeway cares about all of her crew. I mean, her crew is smaller; it's like 100 something people. But I get the feeling that she cares about all of her crew and will go to best for them, which
Yeah.
I can't say for Kirk or Picard, actually.
So, but just imagine if you were on Janeway's bad side. Like, would you ever be able to be on her
No,
good side
that's
again?
cool. That's cool.
That would be tough. I thought this was like might be a very interesting topic. How did each of the captains handle the Prime Directive?
That's interesting, but I also think we should kind of talk about how the Prime Directive kind of changed.
Yeah, and I think that should be part of the discussion. So, like with Archer, like what Prime Directive?
There is no
There is
Prime.
no Prime
Yeah, there
Directive.
is no Prime Directive. They do kind of try not to interfere
Mm-hmm.
with other species. Like
Mm-hmm.
they kind of learn. They kind of learn. They have like this learning curve of should we interfere? How much should we interfere? But they always come to very wrong conclusions. I think every episode they deal with it. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so my question with Archer would be if there had been a Prime Directive, if that had been like the one golden rule they sent him out with, like we
Hmm.
want you to do first contact. We want you to like be a diplomat, but if you see something going on, don't get involved. um, like how do you think that would have worked?
That's what I meant because you see in the original series era, I got the feeling that the Prime Directive was like, don't interfere with pre-warp civilizations. Like, if you see a civilization that it's like in its early stages of development, they haven't yet achieved warp capabilities, they aren't able to, go outside of their area of space. Um, they don't even know. They probably don't even know there are other species out there. um, just don't make contact with them because you can, with your presence, with your influence, you can really change the course of their development. Imagine if aliens with amazing technology have landed on Earth during, I don't know, ancient Greek times. Like, can you imagine how society would have looked today? We don't know, and it could have been very, we don't know if it would have been a good or bad things, and we kind of didn't want to find out. So we're like, let's let them, come to the knowledge on their own. And once they do get warp capability, right, once they are able to travel through space, they would naturally encounter species. So then it's okay to go and say hello.
And we have several episodes centered
Yeah,
around what happens when you don't follow the Prime Directive.
yeah,
So you see a lot of
yeah.
like pre-warp civilizations that have somehow been impacted by a historian or by somebody leaving behind a book or
Yeah.
influenced by something outside of from the outside and how what happens basically what could go wrong.
But in the next generation, by the time of the next generation, you kind of get the feeling that the Prime Directive is kind of changed and is now like, don't interfere with anything, absolutely nothing. If you see something happening, just look away. which is, which is kind of stupid because your presence alone, knowing the Federation, can impact a planet and how they conduct themselves. So this concept of not interfering is kind of stupid because your presence alone is interfering.
Hmm.
And if someone is in trouble, you should probably help them. There are times in the original series when you kind of know that they do kind of interfere if there is no impact on the planet. Like if there is an asteroid going to hit a civilized planet, if the planet has a pre-warp civilization, then Starfleet will kind of take care of the asteroid without the knowledge of the civilization, of course.
There's very interesting nuance here because in the Abramsverse, spoiler alert, in the beginning of the second movie opens up with Kirk having decided on a a mission just to observe a pre-warp culture that because their volcano is about to erupt and wipe them out that he's going to He's gonna have to send somebody into that volcano to freeze it up. So he makes the choice to basically like save that civilization, but of course it backfires, and this whole civilization gets a good look at it, at the ship and his crew. It's interesting that you say that sort of the prime directive has shifted like into the next generation from the original series, because in the Abramsverse, the prime directive at that point would have told them you don't interfere at all, and so Kirk gets pretty much called on the carpet because of that with the
Yeah.
Admiralty.
So I think Kirk in the original series kind of I think he makes mostly the right decisions when it comes to the Prime Directive. Like, if the planet would be severely impacted by their interference, then yeah, don't interfere. But if the planet is already being impacted by interference from other things, then there is no point to stick to the Prime Directive because someone is already interfering there, like
Yes.
in the.
Like where the Klingons show up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that's kind of a good thing. I think Kirk was very smart about it. Picard, on the other hand, one of the things that cemented Picard in my eyes is not a very good captain, honestly, is a very specific episode where they basically meet a species that has been um, in contact with another species from a nearby planet. They don't exactly say they have warp capabilities. Maybe they only have the capability to travel between the two worlds, but they are aware there are other worlds with other people on them, so it doesn't really matter. They are already impacted by the knowledge. And one species has gotten the other species addicted to drugs. And they don't know it. They tell them it's medicine and they're saving them from a terrible disease, but the entire species is terribly addicted to drugs and they have to get a steady supply. And in return, they give the first species, the one that supplies the drugs, all sorts of things, resources that they have on their planet. So they're basically being exploited. And Picard sees this, and he's like, no, the Prime Directive forbids us from telling the species that is addicted to drugs that they are basically being conned, which is it's stupid. They already met them. Their addicted species is aware of other species. There is absolutely no downside to telling them that they're being conned and their entire population is addicted to drugs. And Picard is like, no, the Prime Directive tells us not to interfere, so we won't interfere.
He does that several times.
Yeah.
And not just in
Yeah.
like a situation where they're being conned, but where their race is in jeopardy.
I mean, but I think this is the most glaring one because the species is already aware of other species and has already encountered the Federation. There is no downside here. They're not like this pre-warp civilization that's just beginning to develop. They're already developed. They're already aware that there are other species out there.
I mean, I'm with you. Like my take on Picard's interpretation of the Prime Directive is enforce it no matter what.
Yeah.
And whereas you said like with Kirk, he kind of assesses like does the Prime Directive like still apply in this situation, or what would really be the ramification of breaking the Prime Directive. Whereas I don't feel like Picard's very by the book on that.
Sisko, I think Sisko will fall more in the Kirk category. We don't really see Sisko deal with this question because most of the species Sisko meets are spacefaring
Yes.
and they don't really ask for help or they're already, from the Federation. I don't think the question ever comes up in the entire show of the Prime Directive. Um, but yes, Cisco. I think Cisco would be because he's pragmatic. We see him being pragmatic on so many subjects. I think he would be in the Kirk school of how to treat the Prime Directive because he's pragmatic. He
Yeah.
will see that if upholding the Prime Directive will cause more suffering, will cause more people to die. There is no point in upholding it.
Yes. I agree with that. He's
Hmm.
very much he's closest to Kirk, I think, in that regard. So
Yeah.
Janeway.
Janeway. Well, because of the inconsistency, I would say it depends on who writes the
It
episode.
depends on
Because
if she's
there
had her
are episodes.
coffee, if she's had her coffee or not.
Yeah, there are episodes where Janeway is an absolute stickler for the rules, and she'll never break the Prime Directive. But there are other episodes that she's like, yes, screw the rules, let's help people. It's kind of hard to tell with her. I mean, I tend to have a favorable interpretation of Janeway. I think she would break the Prime Directive actually, to help people. She has breaking rules over the course of the show. Um, she might have more trouble to do it than Kirk or Sisko. Maybe she'll like be hesitant if it's like a pre-warp civilization. But I think she would do it for the most part. I don't think she would like not tell a species that's been conned. She won't tell them they are being conned, like you know.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm in agreement with all of that.
Yeah. So I think we can come back to the question of Archer because that's the question. Which prime directive are we talking about? That don't interfere at all, or just don't interfere with pre-warp civilizations?
I feel like we should probably stick to the pre-warp civilizations, um, simply
Uh,
because that was them building the institution. That's where that was headed.
I do. I actually think Archer will stick to that. Um, yeah, I think he will stick to that. Uh,
I mean, well, I mean, even in the second episode, right? He sees like a ship full of dead crewmen, and
yeah,
he initially listens to his Vulcan officer to just leave it alone, but then he immediately turns the ship
yeah,
around. So I'm that's why I'm saying like pre-warp might be the key word here because like to him those were crewmen, people like just like his people, and he's gonna get involved with whatever's going on. Um,
yeah,
but perhaps he would feel differently if he was just if it was a civilization that wasn't aware
yeah.
of
There are other species
there are
out
other
there.
species out there.
Like there is this episode, a very terrible episode where they meet like this. Finally, they meet a friendly species, yeah, and it has like three genders, but the species basically enslaves the first gender, and and his main in is commander engineering commander Trip Tucker
Yep.
wants to get involved and free this one third gender
Yep.
member of the species that they meet, and the person seemed very happy about being freed, and then but then because they don't but then Archer refuses to help and she gets sent back she they get sent back to their home world where they're treated very poorly and they end up committing suicide because the situation is so hopeless for them.
This was the episode
And
with the sex slave, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
basically,
the one where they were treated like sex slaves, basically. The third gender.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, they weren't allowed to study, they weren't allowed to do anything, but
right.
they weren't allowed to read or write, they weren't allowed to do anything but, used to procreate. They would be rented out to couples to procreate
Yes.
with them.
Yeah, and when Trip like wants to give her asylum.
Yeah,
Yep, I remember that.
yeah. And Archer ends up yelling at him for giving the person hope, basically. That was very, very nasty.
Another question for you, Soda, because that was very interesting.
Mhm.
um, well, and there may be an obvious answer to this. Do we feel that any of the captains has done something completely unethical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said,
uh, was it inevitable, I guess I would say, that they would do something that would be considered unethical, or is it something like completely out of character?
well, I just mentioned something that I think Archer did that was completely unethical. Um, I think it's part of his characterization. I mean, he's not very well written. Basically, he's not a very good. The same goes with Picard. I talked about the species who was addicted to drugs,
Yeah.
not by their own fault, and Picard refused. Basically, at the end, he's kind of like, okay, we're going to like not, we won't tell them, but we'll try to like, hurt their supply line by not helping them, and which is like, it's such a, it's such a tiny thing that would probably have no effect on anything.
Mm-hmm.
That I think it's really ridiculous to say that this is doing something. I think that was very unethical, and it is in Picard's characterization because he is a stickler to the rules.
Uh,
So yeah,
yeah. So for me, it's Cisco. My
yeah,
favorite episode is actually in the pale moonlight.
yeah. It's a lot of people's favorite episode.
Yeah, and I think, and it for me, it's my favorite simply because it's because of what it's about, where he basically attempts to con the Romulans into joining the war with the Dominion, um, and it leads to murder.
But yeah,
And so the basically what he was trying to achieve was to bring in allies against the Dominion to essentially put an end to the war, so that there's less casualty, less devastation. Not the Dominion doesn't win and occupy and subjugate everybody, but they do say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and he even mentions that. But I find it interesting simply because for me, like, conning somebody is wrong.
yeah.
I mean, not that other captains don't pull a fast one, but the impact of this
Hmm.
is is on a much larger scale, because it could turn the tide of an intergalactic
Yeah.
war. And so, like, is it justified? I don't know. I don't know that answer. I think it's very, like, morally gray area. But I think we see in the end that, like, Cisco himself gets conned, and it basically leads to the murder of a Romulan senator.
Yeah.
And while it does prompt the Romulans to join the war, Cisco himself recognizes that his mistake
Mhm.
was thinking that he could do something of that nature and keep it in his control, and not have it lead to people being murdered for basically the greater good.
Yeah.
But at the end, he says, "I can live with it. I can live with it." And I just, that's why it's my favorite episode. But for me, it's sort of like, I think you crossed the line, buddy.
I you see, I don't think he crossed the line very much because, well, his original plan didn't involve murdering anyone or
Right.
leading to the murder of anyone. You can say he maybe kind of fooled himself because he was getting involved with Garak,
Yeah.
which is like, you never know where this is going to lead, right?
Exactly. You should
Um,
have saw it coming. You should have
yeah,
anticipated that, and so that's why he clearly made a mistake because he
yeah.
didn't.
But I think the episode makes it very clear that this was a very desperate
Yeah.
situation. Like, they were about to lose a war to a very dangerous enemy. Um, there were really millions of people were dying. It was kind of a we have no other choice situation. There is another episode where Cisco does something that I think kind of crosses the line, and he doesn't get nearly as much of regret and rumination as this action does. In another episode, Cisco is basically chasing Emma Key, which used to work for him as a double agent in Starfleet and then betrayed him. And basically, he chases the Maquis to his colony in the Badlands, right?
Yeah.
And Yeah, and there is a different colony, a Cardassian colony, that the Maquis is trying to poison, basically, because the Maquis are fighting the Cardassians, who are,
Yeah.
an oppressive government. And so Sisko, in order to get the Maquis to back off, poisons the Maquis colony. Um, he basically makes the planet unlivable for the Maquis. And if they basically if the Maquis managed to evacuate in time, but if they had not, people would have died, right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
that's that's
and
very true.
yeah. Uh, Afterwards, basically the Cardassians and the Maquis basically switched planets because the planet that became poisonous for the Cardassians is not poisonous for the humans, the Maquis humans, and vice versa. But he Cisco just does it, and he knows people might die, and he just does it because he thinks catching the Maquis is more important. Even though I'll be honest, the Maquis itself is like he's not a very big threat. He is annoying, and there is the potential of the Maquis starting the war between the Federation and the Cardassians, but he's not as big of a threat as the Dominion, and he still goes this route.
That's the thing about making these decisions, right? When you're doing something that an outsider would look at that and go, that's not right. That's that's against
Yeah,
like some kind of moral code. You justify it for whatever reason. I need to
yeah.
stop a war. I need to prevent a war. I
And I just find it very interesting that this action of Cisco goes without comments. Like no one on the crew is like, "Sir, this is very dangerous," and like I didn't expect you to do this, and people could have died, and
mm-hmm.
how can you not feel kind of guilty? And Cisco himself doesn't seem to feel guilty at all.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
and even in the pale moonlight, you have like you have people, you have like Bashir who's like, if you make me give this like whatever this gel was, I can't remember.
yeah.
Um, very
Danger.
anyway, if you make me sign, if you make me do this order, I'm going to note it in my log, and I'm just letting you know, like I think this is wrong. And then you have
Yeah,
like Odo who's like, are you going to bribe uh, Cork not to say anything about
yeah,
this guy, this criminal that you want to protect because he's essentially he's the guy who's going to create the forgery. And then even Cork's
yeah,
like, so I'm so glad you restored my faith that every man has a price.
yeah. But you can see throughout the episode how guilty Cisco is about all of this and
He
like
is.
the
He's
lows that
guilty,
he.
but to your point, like other people like call him out, but do they actually do anything about it?
Yeah, but again, I think it shows that the situation is very desperate. Like I said, millions of people are dying.
Yeah.
I think the Muki situation wasn't that dire, and no one commented on it, and Cisco didn't look guilty at all. Just kind of did it, and that's it.
Yeah, it does depend on the circumstances. People say, I mean, obviously people will say killing is justified. It's war.
Yeah.
So,
Um. Yeah. Um.
Janeway.
Janeway, I'm sure she did several things. I can't really remember them right now. Um. Again, writing on the Voyager is so inconsistent. There was even an episode that was like, it wasn't really Janeway's fault, but it was like, you know, Seven of Nine, basically, human Borg who regained her humanity, her individuality. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they come into contact with this weapon seller, and Seven of Nine becomes unconscious for some reason, and then when she wakes up, she's convinced the weapon seller basically stole some of her Borg technology from her body, basically violated her. And it's kind of a pretty clear metaphor for rape. And basically, the entire episode is about how unreliable her memory is. and how it's not a good thing to trust the words of women who say someone violated them. And it ends up with the weapon seller escaping the authorities who are convinced he's guilty and basically kind of killing himself in the process. And I think Janeway is like, oh no, how unfortunate it is we didn't listen to him. And like, this episode is so bad. And yeah, I don't know. Again, it's Janeway. It's a very bad episode. It's one of those inconsistencies we talk about because in other episodes, you know, Seven of Nine is shown to be a far more reliable than that, and people usually trust her. But I think for the most part in the episode, Janeway did believe Seven, so she did do the right thing. So I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember which episode it was, but there's one where she like basically like condoned the murder of two people because she wanted to get back
Um,
her officer. Um,
um,
and you know, it was sort of justified as, well, you know, they were creepy.
I don't remember that either, but I'm sure it happened.
Yeah, so
I think I think the thing is yes, the answer is yes. Janeway will do
yeah,
immoral things. I whether it's out of of character for her or not depends on how you interpret her.
yeah. Like you said, the writing's all over the place because, you know, even in the Q episode, right, where she's
Yeah.
trying to struggle with the moral or the morality
Oh,
of judging whether someone can be assisted
yeah.
in with
I
suicide.
I I, I remember an episode where Janeway was very immoral. It's in the either first or second season with the Kazon, when Janeway and her crew discovered this species that used to enslave the Kazon, basically. And they tried to like broker some sort of peace between the Kazon and that species. And that species is basically very, it's not a good, they're not good people, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very obvious, but the story keeps being on their side and trying to, you know, it keeps trying to portray the Kazon as criminals like it has throughout the rest of the episodes. And Janeway is constantly on this, you know, slaving on the the slaver species side, and yeah,
Yeah, so
so
I
yeah,
think in a nutshell, it's sort of summarized as, if you can justify it, you can do it.
yeah,
It's for the greater good.
yeah,
But I think I will say, like, those moments that happen are moments. You know,
yeah,
it's like everything taken into account, the circumstances, um, you know, the impact, the rationale that leads to them making those decisions. It's not like any one of the captains we mentioned constantly makes those decisions. Although maybe you could make an
yeah.
argument for Archer. But I wouldn't call him unethical. Period. Um,
That's
but his decisions are very dubious. Whereas the rest of the captains, like, you know, unethical is not one of the words I would use to describe them.
correct.
Just, you know, across the board. So I thought it'd be interesting to just take a look at maybe the moments where they're not at their best.
Yeah, it was an interesting
Mm-hmm.
look. I guess the only question left is if you were to rank the captains from um,
Ooh.
closest. I mean, you can rank them from your favorite to least favorite,
Yes.
first of all.
Um,
I think, well, we both said Kirk is at the top for both of us.
yeah, so like I
Yeah.
said, Cisco is next for me. Picard is actually after that, and we probably differ there simply because of what you said about Picard, and then Janeway, and then Archer. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of interesting. It's like I forgive, like on Janeway, like I want to give the benefit of the doubt because the writing was so inconsistent. But with Archer, I just could not warm up to his
Yeah.
character at all. So that's why it's bottom of the
Me
list.
neither.
And Picard had his moments. There were moments where I really respected Picard. It's just that I think as a leader, he's very, like, him being standoffish, being sometimes so rigid when it comes to the rules. Like, for me, I thought he needed to be more flexible. Like, that was his weak point for me, which is why Sisko is for me number 2 on the list.
That makes sense. And if you had to put the movies Kirk, the Abramsverse Kirk in there, where would you put him?
Oh goodness. Um, well, let me tell you a little bit about Abramsverse Kirk, just
All
very
right.
briefly. Um, is he like his original series counterpart? Yes, he is in some ways, but some of his characteristics, like more, I say, or more negative characteristics, are played up a little bit, which is ironic because Kirk is the hero, right? he is this young man with all this potential to become the youngest captain in Starfleet, and so you would want him to have like all these great qualities at the end of the day, like in the first movie, justifies why he becomes captain, basically not even graduating from the academy first. It's which should not happen, but given the
Yeah.
circumstances, they really need to take all the cadets with potential that they can and push them up in rank because
Yeah.
they've lost so many people. So Kirk is still, he's very intelligent. He's still very creative. He's still charismatic, but he does come off a little more reckless than original series Kirk, um, and definitely less polished. Probably has a shorter temper. Definitely more willing to just punch somebody in the face. Uh, but at the same time, he's still very firmly grounded in his belief in Starfleet, his belief in like equality between all races, all people. Um, I think he believes in the institution, and therefore he wants to do his best to uphold the principles. He's definitely like inspires loyalty, so he's got a lot of good qualities. But at the same time, because he's younger, right? He's supposed to be in his 24 or something like that. Some ridiculous, like, talk about, instead of being like 32 or whatever it is when he takes over the Enterprise, having had years as um, served under other captains and gained experience. This is a cadet in his third year at the
Yeah.
academy. and, you
Suddenly
know,
becoming
and
captain.
because he can fly by the seat of his pants in an extremely dangerous situation and, make and basically save the planet, uh, save planet Earth, that they're just going to give him a captaincy. So, um,
Yeah.
but he has to have merit. He has to like be a hero to warrant that. At the same time, he's still very young. He's still very immature. So, where would I rank him in my list? If we were just talking about him from the first movie, he would be under Picard. Um, because I do know that he's hit that potential. Thankfully, because we get to the third movie, we get like the next two movies to see him grow into his role as a captain. So we get to see like what he does, like the mistakes that he makes, what he does under pressure, like not to himself but to his crew. When he gets stranded on a planet, like in his crew's all over the place, like how does he handle those really tense situations? You could see him having grown into the role. So I would actually I would actually then move him above Picard. So my final position for him would be number 3. Not, I
Interesting.
think
Pretty high.
it is very high, but that's because I think he was really matured in the right way by the movie Beyond, and he was so much more like his original series self that it's hard for me like to put him in the bottom. I guess I could say so, but at the same time, original series Kirk and Sisko are still above that. They're a level above. They're fleshed out. They're like really solid captains. I mean, not that Picard isn't solid, but like I said, I don't think Picard's like style is
Yeah.
puts him on lower on the list for me. So original Abramsverse Kirk has the same style as original series Kirk. He just has less time under his belt as a captain, so he gets number 3.
Hmm. All right.
Long answer, or long explanation, short answer. He's in the middle.
Well, yeah, but that's the interesting part, the explanation.
Yeah. I'm just optimistic, so what can I say?
Um, yeah, my ranking is very similar to yours. Just I think we will switch between Janeway and Picard.
Yeah,
I think
that's what I
Janeway
thought.
will
Yeah.
be my number 3. Yeah, Janeway will be my number 3. I never really got into Picard's commanding style. I guess he made too many mistakes, especially in the first couple of seasons, for me to. He did make up for it. He became better in later seasons, but he never really made up for me after that. So yeah, and I guess my other question would be: I already said it. I think that Janeway is the most similar to Kirk out of all the other captains. Do you agree? Do you think Sisko is maybe more similar to him, or someone else?
Given the shows that we watch, Janeway is most like him, but most like Kirk because her situation is similar. Like I mean, and we mentioned that, right? She's definitely out in the middle of nowhere. Like she's basically got to tough it out on her own with her crew and keep everybody alive and
Yeah.
still try to uphold the tenets of their institution. Kirk is very much in that same position. So, I think they react very similarly in the situations that they're in because of that. However, if Sisko had ended up on a ship in the Delta Quadrant, I feel
Or
like
maybe in the Galaxy.
he would also be very similar to Kirk. I'm not going to say that he's going to be more because he does have that impulsive element, right? To him, for the most part, he's pretty like steady on, and he's definitely a command, but he's got combat experience too. So I feel like he's not going to hesitate to take a risk like Kirk,
Yeah.
and he's not going to come out with regrets if in the way that Kirk does. The decisions that he makes, he doesn't seem to regret after. Kirk is a lot like that, except the ones that he doesn't regret till many, many years later. When he realizes they actually did have an effect and that effect has come back around. Um,
Yeah.
they're very solid in like what they decide to do. So I think they're similar in that way. And had Sisko been in that situation like Janeway and Kirk, I think he would be much more like both of them.
That's interesting because one of the original plans for Deep Space Nine is to have like the station become mobile and basically pass through the wormhole
Yeah.
and get stuck on the other side. And I mean, the entire concept of a station getting stuck on the other side is kind of funny to me. But I guess it would have been interesting to see Cisco in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Whereas like Archer, right? Archer is technically even more intensely in the situation Kirk and Janeway are. Um, and he's completely different.
He's like even more unprepared than Janeway.
Right.
Like Janeway,
He's unprepared,
yeah.
and his he doesn't even like. I'm hard to say he even has a style of captaining. He's just kind of like. I don't know how to put it, but basically he's nothing like, to me, he's nothing like Kirk and Janeway.
Yeah, it's true. I think he doesn't seem like to really command people.
Right.
Like he gets the loyalty of the crew eventually, but you get the feeling it's mostly because like they've been through so much dangerous stuff together. They're just like close to each other.
To me, he's like the leader of the gang with the loudest voice.
Yeah, something like that, basically.
um,
Yeah, he is loyal to his crew. I won't say he's like a bad friend or anything, but he isn't really a commander. I don't see him inspiring people that much.
right.
So that's it, I guess.
Yeah, I think we've covered the captains of Star Trek pretty well.
Yeah, that's the end of the episode. I hope you had fun listening to us talk about so many things. And I guess that's goodbye for now.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.